Hey everybody, welcome back to the H4G channel. I am your host Tony, and today we have a very special piece of GameCube development hardware. It is an NPDP cartridge with a beta of the game GUN by Neversoft on it. As far as I'm aware, we're the first people to actually take a look at this thing. Even the owner wasn't able to play it and run it for reasons I'll get into in a moment. But we're going to be going over the differences between this version and the retail version. We're going to be talking about the debug features that are in here, and also for anyone new to the channel, just talking about what an NPDP cartridge is. So, cheers, let's go ahead and get started.
They're hard for games. Games are hard, they're hard for games. Games are hard, they're hard for games. Games are hard, they're hard for games. Yeah, they're so hard. They're hard for games. Yeah, they're so hard.
So here are not all, but many of the GameCube development consoles. And you see the GDEV, the big bulky unit on the bottom that can play NPDP carts, and so can that red unit on the upper right hand side. Of course, you can see that there's an NPDP cart sticking right out of it. We've covered these a little bit on the channel, but mostly we've covered the NR reader and the NR discs. NR discs being a proprietary GameCube development format that can only be read on these particular greenish, tealish NR reader GameCubes. They're a little bit more common, easier to come by. And if you've seen our previous episode on it, more easy to bootleg as well, unfortunately. Now, the NPDP itself is essentially a hard drive that has partitions or sectors. It can hold up to 4 games, and basically what you do with either the NPDP reader or the GDEV is you can swap between those by mimicking the opening and closing of the lid and putting in a new disc, essentially. So basically you're telling the unit that you're swapping discs, and what it actually does is goes to different sectors on the hard drive looking for different pieces of information, software, etc. Apparently, the GDEV units have more RAM than the NPDP readers. So, certain NPDP carts, just saying NPDP over and over again, certain NPDP carts can't be read and played on the regular NPDP readers because they require that extra RAM, or so I am told. I'm not an expert on the hardware aspect of it, but that is my understanding. This will not play on an NPDP reader, but it will play on my GDEV, and that's why the owner couldn't play it, because at the time, he did not have a GDEV, so he sent it over to me to check out. Like I mentioned, this has an early version of GUN on it, but it also has some memory card software, which we're going to go ahead and get into in another episode. So GUN was developed by Neversoft, and you may remember them from the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Actually, this is, I think, their first real departure from the Tony Hawk series into something different. And essentially, it's like Grand Theft Auto, but in the Old West. So I would imagine it's like Red Dead, although I've actually never played Red Dead, but have played many of the Grand Theft Auto games, and it basically plays like Grand Theft Auto in the Old West. A little bit more linear, a little bit less sandboxy, but more or less the same. Now, I've actually been meaning to play this one for a long time, so this kind of was a catalyst to actually get me going in the retail version. I kept running into it in like garage sales and thrift stores, so I actually have the Xbox version and the PS2 version. So the retail footage you're going to see today is actually from the Xbox version of the game. But don't worry, I know I'm comparing beta GameCube version to the retail Xbox version. The retail versions are functionally the same game. And the differences I'm going to show you are so blunt, so obviously different, that it's not going to be a console variation difference. It is a build difference of the game. And I've also watched a lot of footage of the GameCube version on YouTube, and it's functionally the same as the Xbox version. I mean, maybe the draw distance is a little better on the Xbox version, or is a little crisper or whatever, but it's nothing big. And if you still have a problem with me comparing seemingly apples to oranges, maybe you can just go F off. So we boot it up and we see property of Neversoft, and every NPDP cart I've ever seen always has the developer's name at the very beginning when you initially boot it up. What you're going to notice here is that the game is going to load, but we're not going to get any sort of a menu screen. It's just going to plop us right into a mission early-ish into the game. It's telling us to find the local brothel, and we are outside of Dodge City. A couple things to take note of here. You could see large swaths of yellow. This is improperly colored, improperly textured areas of the game. Also take a look at the UI. It's going to be a little bit different than the retail version. And you're going to notice a slow motion mode here that differs from the retail version of the game, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the menu options here. We have a number of cheats, and I don't know if these exist in the retail version of the game. I got about halfway through the Xbox version. I didn't notice any cheats, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. Either way, in the debug menu, they're readily available for you. Now, here we go. Just a ton of missions to select from. The problem here is, and I'm going to show it off a little bit, is that most of these missions either lead to the same mission or crash the game. Also, strangely, the beginning of the game isn't present in this. At least, I could not get to the beginning of the game. There may be more missions in the code somewhere, it just may not be accessible via this menu. Here are some different graphical toggles. Various display modes. None of which I could get working, unfortunately, but it could just be that I don't know what I'm doing. Notice here my dynamite in the lower leftish corner. It's unlimited now. I turned on one of those cheats. Endless dynamite. And my head blew off. Here's a strange graphics test. You could basically just take this still image and stretch it to your liking. I like this because it has Mike K and David, so probably two people on the development team, and you load up their tests and it just crashes the system. Another example of a crash here. Unfortunately, some of the more interesting options that I wanted to take a look at just crashed the game. Test for Steve crashes the game. Character file crashes the game. Now, here are some of the other debug features. You have a free roaming camera, which is pretty common in most debug menus. You can mess around with it. Now here's something really interesting. We're outside of the brothel and you could just see we just have a zombie apocalypse of prostitutes, all the same model, just sauntering across the street. It is super weird because it's nighttime and it's just, they're all the same and they're just like meandering, sauntering through. It's just so weird, so creepy. Number of other options you can toggle through here at the top. And various other tests you can mess with. So before we dive into some of the gameplay differences and story differences, let's talk about the story itself. You are Colton White. It is the Old West, and early on in the game, your adoptive father dies. Before he dies, he tells you to go to Dodge City, go to the brothel, and find Jenny. She is a prostitute, an informant, and most importantly, the keeper of your adoptive father's six-shooter. So let's go ahead and play the scene where they meet each other in the retail version.
Hey, Jenny!
Where'd you get this?
Fella named Ned White give me it. Told me to come here and ask for you.
I remember Ned. He was real sweet on a girl that used to work here, Sadie. That's her picture above the bar.
Sadie. was dead.
What? How do you know? Who are you?
Ned was my father. He and Sadie were both killed on a steamboat up north.
Yeah. Listen, you just...
Come on upstairs.
God damn it, girl! How long we gotta wait before we get a proper poke? Come on, girl! Yeah! Yeah! Like this, Woo! Yeah! Stop him! I get...
So now that we've taken a look at the retail version, let's go ahead and take a look at the exact same scene in the beta version. We'll get into that slow-moving camera in a second. So first off, notice his name is Seth, not Colton. Different clothing for everybody. Animation is super janky. No facial movement. No voiceover. Notice he says Uncle Ned instead of referring to Ned as his father. The beginning missions don't seem to be on this particular card, so I wanted to see if he referred to Ned as his father or his uncle at the beginning of the game, but it doesn't seem to be there. So the only thing I had to go on was this particular piece of dialogue, that their relationship was different in the beta version. The dialogue seems to be a little bit more crude here. Not crude in terms of swearing, but just a little bit less fleshed out. Here's rescuing Jenny in the beta version. After going through a gauntlet. Again, lots of placeholder text for sound effects, that kind of thing here. Oh Lord, the camera. So slow. So slow.
Come over here. Better show you this now before the rest of the red hens.
All right, let's go ahead and watch that same cutscene in the retail version.
It's all yours. Night before she left, Sadie begged me to keep it safe till Ned came for it. Poor girl was in love with him, I think.
Ned never cared much for six guns. Rifle and tomahawk were his choosing. Where'd Sadie go from here?
Empire, New Mexico.
So again, with the retail version, you have this whole backstory with Sadie, Ned.
But she ran off a short time after she got there.
A lot more communication here.
No, but maybe I'll find out. Soon as the roads open, I'm going to Empire to replace her.
So here's another difference. One of the other cities is Empire. Here's the beta version of the game. Also notice all of the hiccups here and graphical oddities. But there's a gazebo right in the center of town, and then you see this building here that looks like it's unfinished. Like unfinished from a construction standpoint.
Come on.
Now here's Empire in the retail version of the game. That gazebo doesn't exist, it's just sort of a semi-walled off commons area, and of course that building is much more fleshed out. There are also a number of situations where you just get under textures or move through walls in the beta version of the game. Now, let's swing back around to talking about the camera, which I've alluded to before. Now, you may have noticed in the beta footage, it is a lot slower. In the Xbox version, you can whip that thing around. Again, it's like a twin-stick third-person shooter, right? So one stick is for movement, the other is for the camera. In footage I've seen of the GameCube version online, you can whip that camera around too. But in the beta version, it is so slow. It is slow as molasses. It is so difficult to control. And it was not my controller. I thought maybe it was. I swapped controllers. Same thing. Same problem. So it is just real rough. In the retail version of the game, you can slaughter townsfolk all you like. However, there is a consequence. Each town has a patience meter, and when that patience meter runs out, there is a showdown. A posse will come out and try to kill you. Once you kill that posse, the patience meter is restored and all is back to normal. It's sort of a fun little consequence. It doesn't really mean much, but it does add a little bit of a wrinkle where it's like you can't shoot up people too much, otherwise you're going to have to battle a little bit more, but that's part of the fun. As you can see here in the beta version of the game, I am just slaughtering people left and right, and there's no patience meter, no showdown, no nothing. And here are a couple of additional glitches. As you can see, there's a lot of stuttering with this. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing because there's also a slow motion mechanic, but as you can see here, it just freezes. Here we are again in Dodge, and you can see there's a lot of green. Here I am leaving Dodge. And boom, daytime. Here's the retail version, which of course is not free of glitches either. I get run over by a horse here, and then it just runs through the train. Speaking of horses, while you're riding a horse, you can shoot, you can have the horse jump, you can have the horse go faster, but in the beta version of the game, you can do all of those things except for have the horse go faster. You get a little bit of a speed boost when you jump, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of button to sprint. It could be that the button is mapped to the same button that pulls up some of the debug options. So maybe they got rid of it in favor of that? I'm not sure, but I pressed every button and combination of buttons I could think of, and I couldn't get my horse to go faster unless I made a jump. So an important aspect of the retail version of the game is your quick draw feature. It puts you into a first-person perspective, slows the motion down so you can very easily get your shots. It's a limited feature, so you can't just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, but it is fun and it allows for higher accuracy, especially when you're in a tough spot. In the beta version of the game, there's something akin to this, but it's in third person. So it does slow down, but because it's in third person, you don't get that transition. It feels more like the game is just experiencing slowdown. Also, it's less accurate because you kind of want that first person perspective to really pick your shots. It doesn't work quite as well. I'm glad that they ultimately changed it. And lastly, in the retail version of the game, when you have your rifle equipped, you can press a button and it zooms in. It allows you to pick your targets a little bit easier, shoot them from a further distance. It's similar to the quick draw, but it's not in slow motion. This zoom in feature does not exist in this particular beta build. So thank you very much for joining us today, and again, thank you to Andrew for letting us borrow this NPDP cartridge. Really appreciate it, sir. And thank you everyone for subscribing, clicking that notification button, ringing that bell so you know when our videos are coming out. And we'll see y'all next time.
They're hard for games.